It's thought that there are loads of parallel universes out there at the same time. For example, the Koran says that God created as many as 40,000 of them. That's a lot. World history shows us that sometimes these worlds intersect. Let's take a look at a few of these cases. Ships. June 1943. American warships are moving along the Aleutian Islands when they suddenly detect several Japanese ships heading on a countercourse. Without thinking, the commander orders to open fire. Within half an hour, the ships have fired 212 tons of shells. What's interesting is that the enemy is silent and doesn't respond to fire. When everything quietened down, it was discovered that there were no signs of Japanese ships. Years later, after the war, it was established that on that day there were no ships at all in that area. Farmer's Sons, 1856, Pennsylvania. There was a rather strange and frightening story that happened here that year. Two sons of a farmer named Cox went missing. One was 5 years old, the other 7. They went for a walk in the woods saying they'd be back in the afternoon, but they never came back in the afternoon or evening. The parents spent the whole night looking for them. In the morning, the parents were joined by a large number of people helping to search for the boys in the forest. But they didn't find them. Then the parents turned to a local shamaness. She lived in an Indian village not far from the Cox farm. The woman asked the parents to bring pictures of the boys as well. When she saw them in the photo, she was suddenly worried for some reason and said they were in another world. The mother was understandably worried, so she asked if this meant that the boys were dead. The shamaness replied that they had gone to a parallel world and that she couldn't see them. She then refused to help them. The parents of the missing children appealed to the public through the local newspaper, asking if anyone had seen the children and could help them find them. After a while, their appeal was answered by Jacob Gibbert, a farmer living 12 miles from the Cox family. He said he had a very strange dream recently, in which he was wandering through an unfamiliar forest and saw a dead deer near a fallen tree. As he walked on, he noticed a child's slipper under a bush, and a river was babbling nearby. Not far away, he saw the outline of a small ravine at the bottom of which he saw 2 dead boys at the roots of a fallen tree. This terrible dream was repeated several times, and when the man heard about the disappearance of Cox's children, he immediately decided to tell him about the dream. The desperate parents recognized the place in his description as the family vacation spot. This place was in the Ohio woods near the village of Creston. They traveled to Ohio with Jacob. It took them about 3 days to get there. By the way, at night on the road, Gibbert saw the same dream again. In the morning, the men quickly found a river, a dead deer, a slipper, and a fallen tree in the roots of which lay the corpses of Joseph and George. How did the children end up in a neighboring state, and what happened to them? The doctor who performed an autopsy on the boys' bodies found no injuries or possible signs of violence. In the end, the cause of death was never determined. It was as if the kids had fallen asleep forever. The police tried to investigate this mysterious case, but they didn't get anywhere. Only the famous American parapsychologist Dr. Barry Gordon put forward his hypothesis on this case. He'd carefully studied all the details and said that for reasons unknown to anyone, the guys fell through a space-time hole and immediately found themselves in another part of the country, in another state. It's likely they died because they witnessed something that children's psyches can't cope with. Or maybe their bodies just couldn't handle the sudden jump in spatial displacement. In any case, there are lots of facts from the past centuries about such spatial holes. They're even mentioned in Egyptian papyri, and in the Middle Ages people believed that witches could move in space. Mine. There are lots of places in the world where there are holes in space. You can find them both above and below the ground. For example, there's a mysterious mine in a Mexican city that locals have been talking about since the 18th century. It's a straight well about 5 feet in diameter, and its walls look like someone polished them. When a daredevil went down into the shaft a few years ago, at a depth of 130 feet, the Geiger counter started going crazy. It showed a sharp increase in background radiation. Several volunteers had already tried to explore this well, but unfortunately they all died of a strange disease. So this time too, the descent was immediately abandoned. The locals say that this mysterious mine has no bottom, and that in its very depths flows some incomprehensible life that violates all possible laws of nature. One day on the Greek island of Tilis, a strange thing happened. A 32-year-old villager named Ioannis Skalofidis climbed out of a well to the surface. He had been there for only an hour and a half, and when he got out he looked like an old man. Since ancient times, this well was considered bottomless. The water in it was icy, even in the most intense heat. One day, when it was time to clean the well, 32-year-old Skalofidis volunteered to do the job. He put on a special wetsuit and was carefully lowered into the mine. The work lasted about an hour and a half. 3 men on the surface periodically pulled up a tank of silt. Suddenly they heard frequent blows on the metal coming from the depths of the well. It was Skalofidis. In a panic, he screamed and begged to be pulled up as soon as possible. When the poor man was pulled out, everyone was shocked. On the ground in front of them lay an old man with completely gray hair on his head, a long beard and worn-out clothes. But what happened in the well remained a mystery, because just a few hours later, poor Skalofidis died. The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was old age. Scotland, present day. The ancient castle near Comcrief has gained notoriety among locals and has also become a place of disappearance for thrill seekers. Robert McDougalley bought the castle for next to nothing simply out of a great love of the exotic. He says he lingered in the basement where he found ancient books on black magic and sat there until midnight. As the sun set, I noticed a strange blue glow emanating from the large central hall. When I entered the room, I was struck in the face by a bright bluish-gray light coming from a huge portrait whose colors seemed so faded during the day that it was impossible to see the drawing itself. I could see a full-length man on it now, and his clothes were made of bits and pieces of costumes from different eras, from the 15th to the 20th century. When I got a bit closer to take a better look, the heavy portrait came off the wall and fell right on top of me. Sir Robert said he was lucky to have survived. Once he'd recovered from his broken leg and the shock, he fenced the entire territory around the castle with barbed wire. But no barbed wire can keep people from being curious. Rumors of what happened quickly spread out of the neighborhood, and gradually tourists began to flock to the mysterious place. The new business flourished, tourists paid, and the ill-fated portrait was lying face down on the floor and no longer shown. Everything was calm for the time being. Then one day, 2 elderly ladies thought of climbing into the hole in the wall behind the portrait. They crawled in and immediately vanished into thin air. The rescuers checked all the walls, went through all the rooms with special radars, but they never found anyone. Mediums and psychics were involved as experts claimed that the castle opened a door sealed for centuries in parallel worlds where the women tourists moved. Again, neither the psychics nor the police were willing to enter that very hole to check this assumption. What do you think about this story? Be sure to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel.